Hello everyone, welcome to this video. My name is Lin Guo. I'm a PhD candidate from University of Oklahoma. Today's topic is about from research gaps to new knowledge. So how to create new knowledge, given that you already identified research gaps? First, we need to know the boundary of our research gaps. Second, we need to pose right research questions and have right ways to answer them. Third, we may meet some difficulties, so we need to answer some questions. And then we need to make a research plan and work out it. First of all, the boundary of our research gaps. Here's the set of the research gaps in my field. And a smaller set inside it is the research gaps that I can find. And inside that are the research gaps that I have interest to work on. And finally, the smallest set is the research gaps that I can fill during my PhD. So I need to focus on the smallest set because I need to get my PhD, I need to have contributions, and I have limited time and energy. For example, on the left-hand side are the research gaps I identified in 2018. There are 12 of them. But on the right-hand side, I reduced them into 4. That's 2020. And for each research gap, I identify some sub-gaps. And these are enough for a PhD. I don't have to fill in all the research gaps I identified at first. Second, we need to pose research questions. How can we do that? First, we need to know our problem is a real problem. How can we do this? Through literature review. And we need to use some tools to help us, such as attention directing tools, something like dilemma triangle, because we need to identify the dilemma and identify the dilemmas that we are going to work on. That's still something helps us to identify the boundary. Second, we need to know about the existing knowledge, still through literature review, and something like thought experiment, because actual experiment may take a lot of time and cost. Before that, we can do some thought experiment and predict the output. And we need to do reality check whether they are going to work. Next, we need to confirm that our problem cannot be solved using existing knowledge. How do we know that? First, we need to know that there's at least one research gap. And second, it is possible to fill in the research gap or research gaps within our PhD. And then we need to propose hypotheses. So we need to know the rough format of the new knowledge we will create. Is it an algorithm or a new method or a new computational framework or some new procedures? And second, we need to know the tentative way to create the new knowledge. Shall we add something to an existing algorithm to make it new, or shall we add some modules to an existing framework to add more functionalities so that new knowledge can be created? Here are some examples. First, how do I know that my research gap is a real research gap and my problem is a real problem? This is the first research gap in my dissertation. And it reads like this. There is a gap between post-solution analysis and modeling improvement using satisficing strategy. How do I know that this is a real problem? Because I have a boundary using satisficing strategy. A lot of people are doing the post-solution analysis and use it to improve the model, but seldom of them are using the satisficing strategy. So I know I don't only give something that nobody is doing, but I give a context of it. Nobody is doing this in a certain way. So through this boundary, I know this is a research gap. If you want to know more about satisficing, you can visit this Wikipedia website. And second, know about the existing knowledge. This is the literature review of some existing methods in this field. And I identify the methods in this column, in the second column from the left, and the second row from the top are the functionalities that we expect those methods to have. Some methods have a lot of functionalities and features, but some methods do not. For those methods which do not have certain functionalities are some research gaps we can fill in. But not all the research gaps can be filled in, or are our focus. We need to focus on the things that we can do and want to do. Next, confirm that your problem cannot be solved using existing knowledge. How can we do this? There are several ways to do it. My way is to find some existing methods to solve several test problems and prove they cannot solve it. Here's a video illustrating how I use multiple existing methods to solve several test problems with certain features that usually exist in our engineering design field. So if you have interest, you can watch this to see why those methods do not solve my problem. And this is the motivation I need to fill in this gap. Next, we need to propose the hypothesis, including gaps, actions, strategy, and contribution. So here is gap 1. I break it down to several subgaps. I break the gap down to several things. The gap includes no criteria, no connections, no computational framework. And how do I know that I can fill in the gaps? Through these actions, the blue ones. The action is modeling improvement. And when I break it down, it includes the system performances, evaluation, and then improvement of the model formulation. And how do I know? How do I do this? Through obtaining insight from exploration and working on the model formulation to improve the system performance. Finally, don't forget your boundary, the certain strategy you use. So I give the boundary in every statement. And from this, the left-hand side, I can identify, I can state the hypothesis. By summarizing the action points and make it more sounding in one sentence, those are the actions in my hypothesis. And then I summarize the contribution in purple. With these contributions, we can fill in the gap we identified first. This is the way to summarize the hypothesis from analyzing the research gaps. Then we may meet some difficulties. We need to answer some questions. What if I cannot answer my research question? So maybe we have wrong hypothesis. We need to revise those hypotheses. Or maybe there's no such new knowledge. It's mathematically wrong. So we need to revise our research question. Or the boundary is huge. It takes far more than 5 years. How about answer it partially in your PhD? And what if I find the answer to my research question, but it is not new knowledge? So basically, this means your research question is not an actual research question. It's just a regular question. So we need to recheck any contribution that we can make that can be new knowledge. If you cannot invent a new algorithm or new method, maybe the procedures you are using is something new and can be reused in some other areas. And the contributions include mathematics, process, concept, knowledge archiving, knowledge management, etc. And what if I answer my research question, but it is not based on my hypothesis? So we can revise our hypothesis, and we can use verification and validation to demonstrate the hypothesis is right. And what if I notice something else? So if I have time and energy, I can include it in my dissertation. But if I don't, I can add it to my future work, the last chapter, for my career proposal. And if it contradicts to my original hypothesis, maybe I need to go back and change the hypothesis and redo the whole process. Hopefully, I identify this earlier. So then we need to make a research plan and work it out. The first thing we need to do is identify tasks and subtasks like this. From each research question, because we already identified the action words, and by restating those action words in sentences or bullet points, we can identify the tasks. For each task, we need to specialize it into subtasks. Each subtask is an action item that your committee member knows it and understands it. And through these action items, they know what you're doing, and they can give you a suggestion whether by doing this, you can actually answer your research questions. And then you can use validation square to structure your dissertation. It has 4 squares, 4 quad chart. First one is theoretical structural validity. Second is empirical structural validity. The first one, you need to have something theoretically sounding. And second, you need to identify test problems and use them to verify your methods. And third square, empirical performance validity. You need to identify the more practical and complicated problems, which are more complicated than your test problems, and verify the utility of your method. And the last square is the theoretical performance validity. That can be your future research. And this identify what you have done can be the foundation of your future work, and it may have broader impact. Then you need to think of the layout of your dissertation. How many chapters do you have? And which chapter can answer research question 1, research question 2, and what are the connections among those chapters? So this proves that the necessity of each chapter and how can they support each other. And then you need to identify the expected output. If you are going to academia, you may need to have some publications. So you can identify which publications can come from which chapters. You may use different test problems in different chapters, and you can publish each test problem as an article. Or you may use just one test problem and discuss it in different ways in different chapters. So summarizing those discussions, you can summarize it as an article. Next, do something like this, scheduling your work based on your tasks, based on your publications. This is from our colleagues who graduated in 2017. So her scheduling was perfect at the time. And next, it's very important. Always have a backup plan, because you don't know what will happen, but you know you will always have a backup plan in case something's wrong. You cannot get a PhD on time. Finally, this is how the research gaps go from the research gaps to the new knowledge. I break down the research gap to several sub-gaps, and then I summarize the hypothesis by analyzing these sub-gaps. I propose the research question in a foundational way, and then adjusted it and specify them in the certain context, and then new knowledge comes up. So the same thing for the second research question. Thank you for listening. Welcome to explore my website. Bye.